We support AI-powered service software. So if you think of an IT department, you have a problem with your laptop, you actually typically contact your IT department with an issue. There's software that actually runs in the background to help with that. So any type of service that requires software on the back end to help resolve a problem for an employee or a customer is what we do.
Hi, and welcome to SaaS Half Full, the only show serving B2B SaaS marketers. I'm Lindsay Groper, EVP of PanBlast, and I will be both your host and bartender today. Had an awesome conversation today with Mika Yamamoto, who is the Chief Customer and Marketing Officer at Freshworks. Mika and I today talked about how you can move from AI experimentation to true AI-powered growth within your marketing org. Now, some of you have a culture of acceptance, experimentation that has been established for quite some time, and others of you are still trying to grapple with how do I talk to my C-suite, my board about making AI investments when they be maybe a little more risk adverse. So Mika gives us her advice on that, as well as how she recommends taking a lot of sales calls and a lot of demos on AI tools so that you always know what's ahead so that you don't get behind. If you'd care to, grab a drink and join me in my conversation with Mika. Hi, Mika. Welcome to SaaS Half Full.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
I appreciate you making this work. I understand you were on the road this week, so we had a bit of moving parts, but somehow we worked it out. We got your cocktail kit to you the day before you arrived at your hotel, and you were such a good sport that you mixed it up.
I did.
What cocktail did you choose today?
Oh, I check out the name. I don't know the official name, but it has a hibiscus float, and it has, I think, a habanero and mango and I think soda water base. And it has these awesome dried citrus fruits. I think it looks like blood orange, and then it has this salt rim. So I haven't tasted it yet, but it smells amazing, and it looks pretty cool too.
You did the thing. And for those of you that are only listening via audio, it is very pretty. So she did a nice job of mixing it up. I'm at home and I'm grabbing what has been my favorite drink of the summer so far. It is a non-carbonated canned beverage, which is really hard to find, called Sun Cruiser.
Okay.
So this is a Sun Cruiser pink lemonade and vodka. I can only drink so many of the, carbonated Trulies and, White Claws and
White Claws.
So
Yeah.
love the fact that this is non-carbonated. So cheers. Nice to meet you.
Cheers to you too.
So today we are talking about how marketing orgs can make the transition from AI experimentation, which I know that you all are doing, and to really becoming an AI-powered business growth engine as a marketing org. There is a lot to talk about here. I have been doing this podcast for about 3 years. So you can imagine we've gone through the roller coaster of AI. So I've had guests on where we were talking about, friend or foe, and then it moved to friend, experimentation, then it's efficiency, and now we all know we're using it, we're harnessing it, but how can you use it really as a growth driver?
Yep.
So happy to have you on the call today to talk about this. I saw that you were heading into what will be your second year with Freshworks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. When you entered the org, was there already an AI culture set or AI rules of engagement set? If so, what was it? And if not, I have more questions.
Okay. I think that it was less about an AI culture. ChatGPT wasn't on the scene yet when I first started here, but AI was. So there were AI tools that helped with web content creation, for example, or content creation overall. But I would say there was a culture of experimentation more than an AI-based culture. So, which is good. I think it's a great foundation to have.
Yeah, open to experimentation, 100%. Which helps.
Yep.
What was your journey before you got to Freshworks? Because you lead both customer and marketing functions at Freshworks. What was that journey up until that? Were you always growing up in that function?
No, I mean, I didn't grow up in marketing. I grew up in consulting. So when I graduated university, I thought I wanted to go into advertising. I ended up going into consulting just to get exposed to different industries and different types of work so I could figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, which I think I'm still trying to figure that out. I fell into a set of roles where every role I've had since university has been roles where a company has wanted to scale and they have to figure out a way to scale. And so I started out doing bank mergers, and then the internet was invented. So I'm dating myself. was how do we scale and how do we really take advantage of the internet? And so I did online banking. And from there, I worked on, going into emerging markets. So Russia, Brazil, India, China. That was strategy work I did, and execution work I did at Microsoft, or the switch from on-prem software to subscription software. How do we drive growth doing that? That was Microsoft Windows as well. How do we go into physical retail? So I worked on going into physical retail for Microsoft, and I did the same with Amazon Books and Amazon Go. And then how do you get into a different market segment? So how do you go into SMB? And I worked on that with Gartner, SAP. I'm doing that now, Adobe. And so we want to go after a different market. We're switching our business model. We want to go into a different country. We want to go into a different product segment. How do we do it? That's how I spent my whole career is figuring that out and then figuring out how to scale.
Okay. And with your current role with Freshworks, what are you charged with there?
I am charged with marketing. So the full stack of marketing for all the products end to ends from brand to advocacy. And then I am also charged with sales organization that sells to companies that are less than 500 employees. And so that's new business expansion and customer success. And then I'm also charged with the support of all of our products for all market segments worldwide.
Anything else to add to that list, Mika? Because that's a long one. That's a lot on one person's plate. And it's okay that you're dating yourself when you said when the internet was invented. Every time we onboard a junior employee and go through sort of like my history, when I say we started the agency pre-iPhone and pre-social media, like the look of shock and awe, I'm like, I realize that seems like that should have been like 50 years ago, but it really wasn't.
No.
I am glad that you and I remember a day where we didn't have iPhones. So it was,
I'm kind of glad,
lots of
I have to say,
me too.
everybody couldn't take a picture of what you were doing, and then you had to figure things
Thank
out.
goodness.
Yeah, exactly. So I would good. I'm good.
Thank goodness. Absolutely. I feel like we were like probably the last good childhoods that there
Oh,
were.
absolutely.
Like,
You just went, and when the sun came down, you came home. I mean, now I get
absolutely.
pictures.
Yeah.
We have 4 kids in university, and I get pictures back of someone has taken a picture and sent it to me, and then I'll show it to the kids. I'm like, how did you get that? And so the internet is all knowing. So,
yes, it is indeed. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess for those on the episode today that don't know about Freshworks, give us a quick couple sentences on what Freshworks does and why you all exist.
We support AI-powered service software. So if you think of an IT department, you have a problem with your laptop, you actually typically contact your IT department with an issue. There's software that actually runs in the background to help with that. If you are a customer of a product and you have an issue with a piece of luggage, which is a problem I recently had, you either email a company, you call them, you chat with them. There's software that runs in the background to be able to help you with that. So any type of service that requires software on the back end to help resolve a problem for an employee or a customer is what we do.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I think we've done some table setting for the conversation. If you can think back to when you first started with Freshworks, can you remember any like early wins that you had at the org in terms of AI implementation?
I do. So because I'm responsible for support, so this won't be a marketing example, but actually plays into marketing a little bit, is we started experimenting with AI to see if we could build a knowledge base using AI. A lot of the situation was that a lot of information was in people's heads. And so if they left the organization in support, they left with all this knowledge. And so what we would call is there's tribal knowledge, and we would need conversations to be able to share that knowledge. And so we didn't have a knowledge base to go off of. And so we've used AI to essentially extract customer engagements, whether it's in email or over the phone or in chat. We've extracted those conversations, and we've used AI to be able to see what the problem was, see what the resolution was, make sure that the resolution was in fact the right resolution. And we've built our knowledge base for most situations. And so that's enabled us to actually have access to the things that our customers contact us about to be able to use for marketing. So questions or queries about a product and how to use a product that we can use in marketing to be able to drive more clarity around how do we drive clarity on how to do things with our products and see most value early on with our products. And so that's initially what we started to look at, is using AI when I first started here in the support organization to be able to see how we could streamline and drive more consistency with support.
You had mentioned at the top of the conversation that when you got there, you felt like there was at least a appetite for AI
It was.
experimentation, which is the right first step. In those early days, how did you make a case for new investments in AI for AI experimentation? Did you have to show results at the end, or what did those conversations look like for those who maybe have that same appetite but have to obviously sell that up the food chain
Yeah.
for the investment?
I don't think we didn't necessarily. I mean, our entire company has a spirit of innovation and of experimentation and piloting. So it was less of a use case or a case to have to go and experiment and try and test. I think that the biggest things were to make sure that we were following guidelines from a security standpoint. We were being clear that we weren't putting anything out there on a public in a public model that wasn't meant to be public, to make sure that we weren't sharing customer information, for example, and to make sure to do some initial sniffs tests to make sure that the tools we were testing out could actually scale to the size of a company that we
Mhm.
are. Those were just initial. They weren't necessarily barriers. They were, in some companies are huge barriers where you can't use certain tools, but it was more guidelines. And so I would say that it was less a case to actually experiment. In fact, we're encouraged to experiment and try things out. And we have the benefit of being in the valley, and a lot of folks, know other, companies that are being invested in. And so we have access to some companies to be able to figure out what they're doing. So we encourage experimentation. We encourage learning about what's happening and innovations that are happening. The biggest pieces are when we're ready to scale. So, for example, we were ready to scale tools to use for our website development and to be able to compress time for what it takes to actually render a web page. So we rolled that out, but that fell within our budget from a marketing standpoint. So we didn't have to bubble it up to anybody, but that could sit in the organization. The biggest thing that had to bubble up were tools where we were starting to drive co-pilot situations between our BDRs and our sellers. That was marketing
Mhm.
power. So I had marketing messaging that was powered by it. Is that after we realized we could experiment with those tools and actually drive more consistency and speed and responding to customers through our sellers, we had to then make the case for spreading out or sharing some of the licenses for that, just because you had a cost implication. And so it just showed that we could, and the proof points for us were, does it increase conversion rate, does it increase engagement, would it increase a deal size? And so we had that thesis going in. And with the pilots, we were able to show that we could deliver some growth with an AI tool and an AI co-pilot. And the sellers were happier, we were happier, because we were seeing better results. So then we could move forward with those tools.
How are you determining timelines for pilots? What estimated success looks like in these pilots when you don't necessarily have a baseline or a benchmark?
Our baseline or benchmark we're using is, we use two. Number one is we look at industry standard if we can get it. So, for example, how long does it take typically to release a campaign? How long does it take for within a certain customer segment to get someone from consideration to purchase? So we use industry
Mhm.
standard data, and then we look at our own baseline data when we do things manually or without AI as a starting point. Because if we're going to do something, it's got to be equal to or better than wherever you started from.
Right.
Most companies typically have where they started from. And so, at the very least, we start with that baseline. And then in terms of the metric itself, it really depends on what we're trying to solve. And so, for example, if we're using AI to come up with initial social copy, to make sure that it's provocative and bold and in line with our tone and manner, and make sure it's consistent with our SRM messaging and technically accurate. We do checks internally with humans to say, okay, if this is what our initial draft looked like, we have humans that actually, it's more of a co-pilot scenario. We won't actually autonomously have a social post release. So a human will check for it, and then we will then put it out into the wild. And there, if social content, for example, we'll look at engagement, as an example, or click through, if there is actually a call to action with that specific piece of copy. And then we'll look at, if we're creating copy for a sales pitch, for example, we'll look at how much it's actually being used and pulled and downloaded from our site that we use to be able to seismic that we use to release content to our sellers to be able to use for sales pitches. So it's usually engagement and use if we're looking at just typically just core content from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah, I feel like one of the challenges with AI investments when it's something that's not directly leading to revenue deals closed, pipe gen. You mentioned like social copy or
Right.
whatever, any copy generation. I feel like one of the challenges that market leaders run into is, okay, I'm going to invest in these 3 or 4 different AI tools, but none of them are actually like directly related to driving revenue, and it's harder to get the buy-in on that investment. I mean, you and I know as marketers that it all works together, right?
Yep.
But it's like investing more in brand, for example, or where you sort of throw the social side of the house. What advice would you have to overcome that? If you're saying I need to make these
Yep.
investments over here that don't necessarily have a direct line of impact to increasing deal velocity or time to close.
It's the value of time. So if I'll use our web team as an example, web teams typically service. They're usually creating amazing containers for brand and the demand teams, the advocacy teams to be able to drive customer engagement. And so, what we want our website to do is be an incredible front door to be able to drive from, consideration to purchase, and then to be able to help customers who are existing customers get what they need to be able to see the value from what they have. That's a lot of heavy lifting that we want our web team to drive. And so it's hard to say, look, if you're going to use AI, did you help with demand? Did you help with brand? But what we do want to do is make sure that we're enabling our web team to work on more complex situations. And so we look at as the opportunity cost of time. And what they've been able to do is, for example, we just entered a partnership with McLaren, and we had to stand up a landing environment for that partnership very quickly. And so to be able to iterate and experiment and come up with the initial rendition typically would take several weeks, and it took them several hours because they used tools like Figma to be able to come up with the initial version of what they thought they were going to experiment with. And that trade-off and the opportunity cost of having someone and an individual work on something for weeks versus work on it for hours and then work on something else where they could really be focused they could focus their time on raising the bar in terms of how they're improving our website and engagement on our website is where we want them to spend time. And so a lot from marketing I find is the opportunity cost of time, and it's a lot of time savings so that we can have the people who are incredibly skilled do what they do best, and what humans can only do best is frankly more rewarding for them to get to work on that type of work, and it helps us raise the bar a lot faster.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something that must be really difficult in your role is finding a new tool or building it yourself and taking the time to prove its effectiveness, prove out your theory, only for the next great thing to come along after you've already implemented the other thing, because it's changing so fast. And I mean, we experience this in our own business as well.
100%.
How do you balance that with trying not to, ditch what was brand new now, but tomorrow's old, and like go to the next shiny thing? How do you balance that with experimenting with what you have versus investing in what's coming next?
Like, I mean, there's definitely, even though a lot of the tools that are out there are easy to dive into and you can get up and running, I mean, there still is a component of getting up and running and training yourselves and your teams and morphing your processes to be able to take advantage of these tools. And so okay, well, is it that much better? Is this tool that can drive and deliver content creation? So for example, if you're using a tool like Jasper and then you want to develop your own tool in-house, how much time is it going to take to train it, and how much better is it going to be because something in-house is less likely to evolve faster from an innovation standpoint than a third party who's constantly looking at different ways to optimize content creation. And so I think there's a speed and a quality trade-off definitely that we look at. What we try to do, because as soon as you release something, it's dated, right? Especially now, is we do try to look at the trade-off in terms of, look, what do we think the benefit is of jumping to this other thing? And if it is that significant of a benefit, whether it's time savings or whether we can collaborate better because we work across multiple time zones, we have to weigh those pros and cons. The biggest thing that we do, and I think the biggest advice I would have, is just keep learning and keep responding to the calls that you get from vendors who are saying, hey, I have the next thing, not because you necessarily have to bite, but it just I think it keeps us fresh in terms of making sure that we understand the innovation that's out there and we understand what's possible. And then the second piece of advice is just to have a good set of trusted individuals that do the same role as you, to be able to go back and do some checking and say, hey, what are you? And I think it's, you've got to meet with them on a regular basis. And this isn't at least monthly, and have a Slack channel. I've got a Slack channel of similar people who do similar job to me, and they're around the world. And we'll say, hey, have you tried this tool? Yes, I tried it. I hated it. Or yes, I tried it and it created a big security leak. And so you can have a set of trusted people who are like-minded to be able to take what you've learned from a new vendor and say, hey, has anyone tried this? Just so you can start figuring out what works and what doesn't, because it's really hard to figure out because there's so many companies that are saying they do personalization of content, for example, or enrichment of leads or creation of content. I mean, you name it. And what we do in marketing, there's a tool out there for it. And there's a new one every week. You could find a next new best thing, but keeping the research and keeping, staying true to what the tools out there, and then having a set of individuals that you can test and learn from, and you can see whether they've used similar tools to be able to get some guidance and feedback. I think has been very valuable, especially right now, given how fast things are shifting and innovating.
Easy fast. But there are a few SaaS sellers listening to this episode. They just got so excited because you just told everyone to take the calls and take the demos.
It's
Like,
helpful.
yes.
It's been we sometimes our CEO joins them. We were careful and we look at their investors and we do a background check, not background check, but we check in the background to see who might be using those tools. But it's
Totally.
actually really enlightening to actually take calls. And the last two calls we took, we actually engaged with those two companies in parallel just because they had amazing insights for us. And it was kind of we can't lose by trying them out. And so we're trying both of them out in parallel. And it's two services that actually help us figure out where ChatGPT and Perplexity are actually pulling our content and what type of content is most effectively driving visibility for us on those in search, in AI search. And so that's a holy grail for everybody, I think, right now. And so any insight we can get can't hurt.
Yeah. I was just talking to my colleagues about this and the AI search and all the different tools that are available. And it is literally like, it's partially like the wild, wild west, but in a black box. It's like no one can quite prove or disprove the data that's coming out of it. And there's so many tools, and depending on which one you use for AI search visibility, they say two very different things. And so everyone is scrambling to figure it out right now,
100%.
which is a fun place to be. But agree with you on making sure that you're taking the calls and taking the demos, just so you at least are aware
Totally.
of what else
Yep.
is out there. Is this different than my current solution? Because if it's different and better, you don't want to miss the boat on it and want to know.
Absolutely. And we run several in parallel. So we run some of these analytics tools in parallel just to compare and contrast. We're running 3 in parallel right now just to see what the results are in terms of which channels are most effectively, what do those tools tell us are most effectively surfacing our content, and then which content is most effective. And so we're learning from that and just, trying to do checks on our own just to triangulate what we think is working and what's not.
I love that. One thing you had talked about was sort of knowing when to scale to something broader. What is harder? Is it getting the technology right or getting the people on your team to actually like change their workflows and use it? Or equally as difficult?
Actually, in a lot of organizations that I belong to, it's actually the people side and getting the people to shift with it. Interestingly, I haven't had that challenge here in any function. It's been really remarkable. And so it's a unique situation where it's less about the people because the people have had a really big appetite for experimentation and using something different and better. We don't mandate, we as a leadership team don't mandate and say, look, you have to, Lindsay, save 20% using this tool. We're just saying, hey, why don't you just go find efficiency so you can have better trade-offs and use your time better. And again, we've always had this notion of experimentation and piloting and learning. And that's helped us a ton to be able to have a bedrock of people that are willing to test and learn and try different things. I think the biggest shift we've had has been less in marketing and more in support, where there's a lot of people who have known their processes and this is what my job is, to be able to use something that is and trust something that is a co-pilot versus trusting that they know better and they have the better response. I would say the same for sales or even enabled sellers with tools that can automate and personalize communication to their customers. It's like, well, I know better. And I think a little bit is a little bit of an existential threat because it's like, well, if this tool can actually come up with this content, where's my value add? And I think that what we've had to do as we've dove into opportunities, whether it's marketing or sales or support, where we're saying, hey, we really want to take advantage of AI. When I initially put out a call for how are people using it, there were some people that were saying, like, why are you wanting to do this? Are you doing this because you're driving this as a cost-cutting measure? So I had to be really clear that, look, we'd love to be more efficient. We always want to be more efficient, but it's being more efficient while raising the bar for what we're doing over and above efficiency for efficiency's sake. And so we had to make
Yeah.
that clear so that people didn't feel threatened by the fact that, because I mean, there's so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there in the market that says AI is going to take people's jobs. I
Mhm.
think it's going to change people's jobs, but we had to make sure that we're making this a safe place to experiment, and that experimentation didn't mean that you were going to work yourself out of your job. You may actually work yourself into a more interesting job because you're going to spend less time doing mundane things, which is really what we're looking to do. We just want to make sure people are doing fewer repetitive tasks that frankly they
Mhm.
don't need to be doing.
Yeah. I mean, we would always say with our sort of mid-level folks is that we your goal is to find the next you, train your replacement,
Yeah.
not so that we get rid of you, but so that we can elevate
Mid-level.
you. Well,
Yeah,
so you don't so it's very in my mind similar to that where you need to spend the time to train the
absolutely.
AI to replace you so that you can do more high level work. It's just now
Absolutely.
that's a bot versus a person. But and that's something we still tell our folks is it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you want a promotion, but like who's the next you?
Yeah.
And it's like you who on your team have you gotten to a place where they can take your role because we can't elevate you without right someone to fill
100%.
that role. So it's just now not necessarily a person that we're looking.
Exactly. And
And
I think that that learning mindset is something that we're trying to reward. Because on it, if you're not embracing it, you're going to end up falling behind as a practitioner just because you're not going to be able to keep
Mhm.
up with your peers, right? There's so much you can do
Yeah.
faster. If you have to get through volumes of data or information, you can get a summary so you know where to dive deep. And so I think that leveraging these tools makes you more efficient if you use them effectively and safely. And if you don't, I think you will fall behind. And so I think you've gotta be curious and be able to see how you can get as much leverage as possible.
Yeah. Um, Final question, is, when you look at your stack,
Yep.
what is one tool that you would fight to the death to keep? And on the flip side, what's one that you look at and you're like, "Eh, little bit of regret in that one, but we're, like, in too deep." And you can mention the actual vendor or not with either of these, but just curious your answer on both of those.
And I'll stick because the audience here is mostly marketing. The thing that I would fight to the death to keep is the enrichment tools that we have that enable us to enrich information to figure out and enhance what we know about a customer's intent. And so that helps us understand and look at how do we drive cohorts within our customer base that says they're showing these intent signals, so we should address them in this way. It helps us accelerate the engagement with some customers, personalize that engagement, and drive higher close rates with those customers, and have richer conversations and more personalized conversations with those people. So I think that would be something that I would fight to the death to keep
Yeah.
in marketing specifically. Some of the tools that we have used for content creation, so we've decided to actually go internally and create a chat GPT, internal chat GPT like tool that helps us create content. Just because a lot of content creation that we've used in the outside has sounded like it comes from AI, that it's come from an AI tool. And that is neither compelling nor interesting, is something that I think people are starting to see through pretty significantly. And so I would say that we've seen mixed results with some of the tools that create content on our behalf. I've seen
I would
extraordinary
agree.
results with Copilot tools that draft emails, personalized emails based on a background of what we might know about a customer. But when it comes time to creating drafts of certain copy, I've seen that those tools haven't been as great as I had hoped.
My experience has been the same with that as well,
Yeah.
for sure. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure that we tackled on this topic?
I think it's less that we didn't cover it. It's more reinforcing, I would say, to people to say, take some of those calls, do a check, take some of the calls and be curious about what else is out there, just because there's so much innovation and so many advancements. But I think most importantly is find a crew of people that you can, who will agree to, getting on a Slack channel, and who will agree to exchanging ideas and exchanging feedback and lessons learned about tools that they've used. Because there's so much innovation, it's impossible to keep up. But it's more possible if you've got a set of advisors who are like-minded to be able to bounce ideas off of. That's been absolutely invaluable for us, in the different practitioners, whether they're brand practitioners or social practitioners or web practitioners. That sharing of information has helped us sort of sort out and filter out what's great and what's not.
And I also love that you will run competing tools congruently to figure out which one is the best,
Yeah.
versus trying one and being underwhelmed, trying another one, be like, I don't know, maybe. And that, so, right, it's like instead of being 6 months down the road, you can do them all together. So I really like that piece of advice as well. Okay, well, to close this out, I ask all of my guests the same question, which is, do you have a favorite or signature toast
Hmm.
to send us out?
I do, and I am half Japanese, and so the singular toast that I would have is kanpai, which means cheers in Japanese. So I would say kanpai.
Hi.
Yes.
That is new for me, and I love that. We've had a lot of cheers in a lot of different languages, but
All
this
right.
is a first. So,
Perfect. All right.
kanpai.
Kanpai.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Thanks to Mika for joining me on Sass Half Full. Love that conversation. Hopefully, each of you was able to take one actionable thing away today that you can implement immediately or give you some fresh ideas on how to advance AI within your own marketing org. Really appreciate the listen. And until next time, bottoms up.